It rests in the low light of a curated silence, a block of baked clay no larger than a human hand, the Weld Blundell Prism. Its four sides are covered in a script that seems almost geological, lines of cuneiform pressed into the earth when this civilization was still new. This is not a poem or a prayer. It is an administrative document, a list of kings and the cities from which they ruled. It is an artifact of order, a testament to the meticulous, almost obsessive need to record the transfer of power. And on its surface, etched with bureaucratic precision, is a number that should not exist. 241, 200 years. The combined reign of the first 8 kings before a great flood swept over the land. We are accustomed to treating such numbers as myth, the fanciful exaggerations of a pre-scientific age. But the scribe who impressed these marks was not a storyteller. He was a functionary. His formula is repeated with a cold, almost mechanical rhythm down the clay face. A name, a city, and a length of rule. The entry for Alulim, the first king who ruled from the city of Eridu, is given the same weight and format as the entry for a historical king who reigned for a mere 2 decades. The document itself presents no hierarchy of belief. It is simply a ledger, and this is the first entry in a long and supposedly unbroken account of sovereignty. The scale of these initial entries is difficult for the mind to hold. 8 rulers, spanning 250,000 years. Their reigns are measured in units called sars, each a period of 600 years. Enmen-Lu-Ana ruled for 200 years. Dumuzid, the shepherd, for 36 Euzao. These are not presented as metaphors. They are recorded as administrative fact, data points in a system of succession that, according to the document, was the very foundation of civilization. The list is a chain, each link a reign, and its purpose is to demonstrate a continuous, stable transfer of authority from the dawn of time. If you wish to remain with this artifact as we examine its deeper inconsistencies, you should subscribe to this archive. It is a quiet way to ensure you are present when the next record is opened and the silence is explored further. We look again at the clay prism, its edges worn by the passage of more than 4,000 years. The air in the room is still. The number, 241, 200, does not feel like a myth when you see the physical marks that record it. It feels like a problem, a deliberate, carefully preserved problem. The object itself seems to challenge our assumptions, not with a shout, but with a quiet, persistent fact of its own existence. It is a piece of accounting from a world with a different understanding of time, and it has survived, waiting patiently for a different kind of audit. The true strangeness is not just in the numbers, but in what follows them. After the flood, the list resumes. Kingship once again descends from the heavens, but the scale has collapsed. The reigns are now measured in human lifetimes, 24 years, 30 years, 15 years. Yet the scribe's tone does not change. The formula remains identical. The same dispassionate administrative language is used to record a reign of 800 years, as is used for one of a few hundred. The document makes no distinction, offers no explanation for the radical shift. It simply presents 2 completely different orders of reality as a single, continuous list. One begins to feel the presence of the scribe, the unseen hand that held the stylus. This was not a person inventing a mythology for entertainment. This was a bureaucrat, a keeper of records, whose duty was to the continuity of the list itself. For this individual, the integrity of the formula was paramount. The nature of the data being entered, whether it was a reign that spanned millennia or one that ended in a single decade, was secondary to the act of recording it properly. The very coldness of the presentation is what makes the content so unsettling. It is an impossible fact recorded as ordinary business. And so the initial question, whether these long-lived kings were real, fades away, replaced by a more profound one. Why would a civilization, one so concerned with law, commerce, and historical precedent, anchor its entire history of governance in a set of figures that defy all logic? Why would the first chapter of their official record be a mathematical impossibility, presented with the dry formality of a tax document? It suggests the list was not meant to be a literal history in the way we understand it, but was serving a different, more urgent function. The dust motes drift in the beam of light illuminating the prism. Time feels suspended here, in the presence of this object. It is a message in a bottle, but the message is written in a language of administrative procedure, not of narrative. It is a fossil of a thought process, a preserved system of order. And like any fossil, its most important features are not the parts that are present, but the strange shapes and disturbing absences that hint at the creature that once was. The purpose of the list, from its first line to its last, is to document continuity, an unbroken chain of command, a clear, recorded succession of power from one ruler to the next, from one city to another. It is a monument to the idea that order is never truly lost, only transferred. Yet this entire document, this meticulous record of continuity, is built upon a single, catastrophic, and unexplained break. The story it tells is not one of stability, but of a system so completely broken that it had to begin again, on a scale our own world could finally recognize. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In the city of Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 800 years. This is the first entry. It is not presented as an epic opening, but as the beginning of a ledger. The formula is set: a location, an individual, a duration. The number is recorded with the same weight as the name of the city. A simple fact to be noted before moving to the next line. The process has begun. The second entry follows without variation. Alalangar ruled after Alulim. The duration of his reign is listed as 36 years. The scribe's stylus makes the same precise marks in the clay. There is no change in pressure, no flourish to denote the passage of such an immense span of time. It is data, entered into a system. The purpose is not to persuade, but to catalogue. The second name is added to the chain, and the total duration of recorded sovereignty grows. The ledger is then balanced for the first city. The text states, 2 kings, they ruled for 800 years. After this summary, the administrative protocol for transfer is initiated. The formula is precise. Then Eridu fell, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The fall of a city, the transfer of supreme authority over the land, is reduced to a single procedural clause. It is a transaction recorded as complete. In Bad Tibira, 3 rulers are listed in succession. Enmenlu-Ana, whose reign is recorded as 200 years. Then Enmengal-Ana, who ruled for 800 years. And finally, Dumuzid, the shepherd, whose tenure is marked as 36 years. The names change, the numbers shift, but the structure of the record remains immutable. The list is a container, and the scale of its contents does not alter its shape. The accounting for the second city follows the established protocol. 3 kings. They ruled for 108 years. The sum is calculated and entered. The next transfer is then recorded with the same dispassionate language. Then Bad Tibira fell, and the kingship was taken to Larak. Another cycle of power from its seat to its end is closed in the document. The chain of succession continues, unbroken. In Larak, there is only one king listed, Ensipad Zid Ana. The length of his rule is given as 800 years. The scribe makes the entry, notes the single ruler for this city, and prepares for the next transfer. The list accommodates dynasties of 1 with the same procedural ease as dynasties of 3. The individual reigns are merely variables within a constant, unyielding formula. The transfer is executed once more. Then Larak fell, and the kingship was taken to Sipar. The mechanism of the list continues its function. In the city of Sipar, another single king is recorded. His name is Enmen-Dur-Ana, and his reign is documented as lasting 21,000 years. The number is different, smaller than the others, but it is entered into the same rigid framework. The final antediluvian transfer is recorded. The list notes, "Then Sippar fell, and the kingship was taken to Shuruppak." This is the last city to hold power before the Great Rupture. The administrative process that has governed every entry thus far continues, moving toward its final, unwritten conclusion. The location is set for the last act of an era. In Shuruppak, the eighth and final ruler of this period is named Ubara Tutu. His reign is recorded as 18,600 years. This entry is made with the same administrative finality as the first. It is the last data point before the system itself is overwritten. The scribe gives no indication that this reign is different, that it stands at the edge of a terminal event. Notice the silence in the room where you are now. The specific quality of the light. This record continues, indifferent to the present moment. It was made in a world of baked clay and reed styluses, and its cold rhythm persists, a faint, steady pulse beneath the noise of our own time. The final tally is presented, a summary of the entire period. In 5 cities, 8 kings, they ruled for 241 years. This is the closing balance of the antediluvian world. It is an act of accounting, a grand total delivered just before the ledger is violently closed. The number itself is a monument, the sum of an order that is about to vanish. Here, the document breaks its own laws. The meticulous formula of succession, of a king's end, and the transfer of kingship is abandoned. After the final reign of Ubara Tutu, the scribe does not write of his death or the fall of his city. The next line is a declaration of systemic failure. It says only, "Then the flood swept over." The record then resets. The scribe begins again, using language that echoes the very first line of the document. After the flood had swept over, and the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. It is a reboot, a restoration of the system of documentation. Kingship is once again lowered from the heavens, and the ledger is reopened. The first king of this new era is named Jushur. He is from the new seat of power, Kish. The duration of his rule is recorded as 200 years. The number is entered with the same formulaic precision as the reigns that lasted tens of thousands of years. But the scale has been fractured. A new temporal order is being recorded, without comment or explanation. After Jushur, the next king of Kish is listed, Kulasina Bel. His reign is documented as 960 years. The downward compression continues. The numbers are still large by a modern human standard, but they represent a collapse of the previous timescale. The scribe continues the work, entering the new data into the old, unchanged structure. Further down the same list, within the same dynasty of Kish, appears the name Enmebarajesi. His reign is given as 900 years. This name is not just a part of the list. It has been found on separate, contemporary inscriptions. He is a verifiable historical figure. The document places this tangible piece of history in the same column as Alulim, who ruled for 800 years, making no distinction between them. Centuries later in the document's timeline, the list arrives at the famous Third Dynasty of Ur. One of its kings, Ur-Nammu, a figure well documented by archaeology, is recorded as having ruled for 18 years, a human lifetime. This entry is processed by the scribe with the exact same administrative formula used for the kings who ruled for 10 Tau Sars. The defining feature of the document is not the impossible numbers, but the system that contains them. The list's own internal logic insists that a reign of 18 years and a reign of 200 years are equivalent data points. Both are processed, recorded, and summarized using an identical method of accounting. The container does not care about the nature of its contents, only that they are recorded. The system itself is the message. The work of the researcher is one of quiet comparison. On a sterile table under a controlled light, 2 points in the long column of the list are brought into alignment. The first is Alulim of Eridu, his reign documented at 800 years. The last, from a much later dynasty, is Ur-Nammu of Ur, a known historical king whose rule lasted 18 years. The physical distance between them on the full scroll of the list is considerable, a chasm of recorded time. Yet here, side by side, they exist as equivalent entries, 2 names in the same ledger, processed by the same administrative mind. The act of cataloging reveals the first, most fundamental pattern. The scribe's method is the constant. The cuneiform symbols for king, city, dai, and years do not change their form or function. The syntax of the entries remains rigid, a template into which names and numbers are placed. There is no special script for the antediluvian rulers, no mythological flourish to set their reigns apart. The stylus that marked 18 years for Ur-Nammu used the same pressure, the same angle, the same procedural dispassion as the one that marked 43, 200 for Enmen-Luana. The system itself is blind to the scale of the data it records. This uniformity forces a difficult observation. The king list is not presenting 2 different stories, a myth followed by a history. It is presenting a single, continuous account that contains 2 completely different orders of reality. The document's own internal logic insists that these 2 realities are part of the same unbroken chain of sovereignty. The tension does not come from the numbers themselves, but from the cold, procedural framework that holds them together, treating the impossible and the historical as functionally identical. A researcher lays out reproductions of the tablets, arranging them not by dynasty, but by their relationship to the single, catastrophic event. The pattern that emerges is one of profound symmetry. On one side of the divide, a small number of rulers with immense lifespans. On the other, a multitude of rulers with lifespans that, while long at first, eventually compress into a recognizable human scale. The flood is not merely an event in the story. It is the document's structural axis, the point around which the entire temporal order of the world pivots. One must pause here, to see the record not as a text to be read, but as an object to be seen. The structure itself is an artifact. It is a preserved diagram of a broken timeline. The sterile layer of silt found by archaeologists between the layers of cities in ancient Mesopotamia has a precise parallel here, in the text itself. A clean, silent break, after which everything that is built is of a different material, a different scale. The pattern is undeniable, and it is repeated across every known copy of the list. First, an era of stable, long-duration reigns, recorded with administrative precision. Second, a single, unexplained systemic collapse, noted with a single clause. Third, the re-establishment of the same administrative system, but now recording a world that operates on entirely different physical and temporal laws. This is not the slow evolution of myth into history. This is the documentation of a single, sharp, and total discontinuity. To remain with these records is to accept that some patterns are not meant to provide answers, but to deepen the question. Those who continue to watch from this quiet space are not seeking a simple conclusion, but are content to observe the shape of a memory that has been preserved, even in its brokenness. The researchers' work shifts from comparison to sequencing. The reigns immediately following the flood are plotted on a timeline. Jushur of Kish, the first king of the new era, is said to have ruled for 200 years. His successor, Kulasinabel, for 960. The next, 900. Then 840, 720, 600. The numbers are not random. They show a consistent downward trajectory, a decay curve. The scribe is not just recording new kings. They are documenting the slow, systematic compression of the timescale itself. This is not the pattern of a scribe correcting a mythological exaggeration. A correction would be a sharp drop to human numbers. This, instead, is the meticulous record of a system winding down. It suggests the new order, while diminished, was not immediately human. It carried a residue of the old timescale, an echo that faded over centuries of recorded rule. The scribe, with their unwavering administrative focus, captured this decay without comment, simply entering the diminishing numbers into the ledger as they were understood to be. One feels the slow, grinding passage of this forgotten process. A world losing its temporal magnitude, generation by generation. The list does not describe this, it performs it. The viewer, following the numbers down the clay tablet, experiences the collapse not as a story, but as a slow, inevitable mathematical process. The silence of the scribe is filled by the weight of this descending sequence. The focus of the investigation now moves to the mechanism of transfer. The archaeologist traces the recurring formulaic phrase that acts as the engine of the document. Then City A fell, and the kingship was taken to City B. This is the protocol for succession, the legal and administrative clause that ensures the continuity of power. It is the list's most important structural element, repeated dozens of times throughout the text. It signifies order, process, and a predictable transition. This protocol is applied with absolute consistency. The transfer of kingship from Eridu to Bad Tibira, after a combined reign of 800 years, is recorded with the exact same language as the transfer from one historical dynasty to another hundreds of years later. The system for recording the change of power is indifferent to the duration of that power. The process, the administrative ritual, is what matters. The scribe's duty is to this formula, the guarantor of an unbroken chain. The implication of this pattern is profound. The keepers of this record were not primarily concerned with the individual kings or the literal truth of their reign lengths. Their obsession was with the principle of legitimate succession. The list is a legal document, a testament to the idea that sovereignty is a continuous, transferable essence. Its purpose was to prove that authority was never lost, only moved. The entire edifice of their history was built on this single, foundational concept of an unbroken chain. And it is here that the researcher finds the core anomaly, the pattern that is defined by its own violation. The process of excavation reaches the final layer of the antediluvian world. The entry for the eighth king, Ubara Tutu of Shurupak, is recorded. He ruled for 600 years. The meticulous protocol established from the very first line of the document dictates what must come next: the fall of his city and the transfer of kingship to another. But the formula is not executed. The scribe, for the first and only time in this section of the list, breaks protocol. The mechanism of transfer simply vanishes from the record. In its place, a statement of pure event, devoid of administrative process. Then the flood swept over. The system, so rigorously maintained, does not record a transfer of power. It records its own termination. It documents the moment its own rules became irrelevant. The silence that follows this line in the text is the true focal point of the entire document. It is an administrative vacuum, a procedural void. The unbroken chain of succession, the very reason for the list's existence, is shown to be decisively broken. The event was so total that it could not be processed by the established system of record-keeping. It was an anomaly that the system could only register by failing. And so, the patterns converge. A system of recording that treats impossible scale and human scale as identical. A catastrophic event that serves as a structural fulcrum, dividing time into a before and an after. A slow, decaying compression of reign lengths in the new era. And at the heart of it all, a meticulous administrative protocol of succession that is followed without fail, except for the single, critical moment when the old world ends. These are not the features of a simple myth. They are the preserved artifacts of a system under stress. They are the data points of a catastrophic failure, recorded by a bureaucracy so dedicated to its process that it documented its own obsolescence. The question is no longer whether the reigns were real, but what kind of authority they represented, an authority whose end was so absolute that it broke the very concept of succession. The investigation must now turn from the structure of the record to the nature of the authority being recorded. The list does not begin with a creation myth or a heroic epic. It begins with a declaration of administrative origin, a statement of provenance for the concept of rule itself. After the kingship descended from heaven, the text states, "The kingship was in Eridu." This is not poetry. It is a procedural clause, the documented starting point of the entire system of governance. It establishes the source of sovereignty as an external transfer, a delivery of a function from one domain to another. These first holders of power are not described. They are simply listed. Their names, Alulim, Enmenluana, Dumuzid, appear in the ledger with no more embellishment than a historical king from a later documented age. They are not assigned divine attributes, emotional states, or physical descriptions. They are presented solely through their function. They were the ones who held the kingship. Their identity is inseparable from their administrative role within the documented system. They are the initial data points in a long and supposedly unbroken account of authority. Their otherness is defined not by myth, but by mathematics. The timescale of their rule is the only feature that separates them from their human successors. It is a difference of quantity, not of quality according to the scribe's own method. They are not gods who perform miracles. They are executives whose tenures are measured in units that defy biological reality. This quantitative strangeness is presented with the same dispassionate tone as the rest of the ledger, making it a problem of accounting rather than a matter of faith. One must consider the implications of a bureaucracy that begins its records this way. It suggests a worldview in which the abstract concept of order, of kingship, was understood as a tangible system, an apparatus that could be lowered, installed, and operated. The heavens, in this context, serve not as a divine realm, but as the documented point of origin for the technology of governance. The first kings were, according to this record, the first operators of this imported system. The document gives them a title, a collective designation that is often translated as Anunnaki, Sat, but within the administrative context of the list, this term functions less as a name for a species and more as a classification for a type of ruler. They are the ones who came from heaven, the original bearers of the authority that would later be passed down. Their role is hierarchical and foundational. They are the predecessors, the first link in the chain of command, whose legitimacy is the ultimate source for all subsequent rule. Their actions, as recorded, are exclusively administrative. They rule from specific, named cities on Earth: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak. They preside over vast periods of stability. And when their tenure in a given location ends, the kingship is formally transferred to another city, where another of their kind takes up the role. Their entire existence within the text is defined by the holding and eventual transfer of this singular function. There is no record of them building, conquering, or speaking. They simply reign. This sterile, functional portrayal is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire record. A mythology of powerful gods would be familiar. A purely fictional list of fantasy kings would be understandable. But this is something else entirely. It is a ledger of a system of governance operated by entities whose only defining characteristic is their position within that system, and a timescale that does not belong to our world. They are not characters in a story. They are entries in a database. The air in the archive grows thin. The silence deepens. The mind tries to construct an image of these beings, but the text provides nothing to hold on to. There are no faces, no bodies, no intentions. There is only the cold, repeating formula: a name, a city, a number. The scribe has preserved not a memory of beings, but a fossil of a command structure. Their relationship to humanity is never stated, only implied by the structure of the list. They are the before and human kings are the after. They are separated by the flood, the great discontinuity that reset the scale of the world. The document does not present a war, a rebellion, or a handover ceremony. It presents a system in operation, followed by its catastrophic failure, followed by its reboot, with new operators working under radically diminished parameters. The term kingship itself seems to be a specific technical concept in the hands of the scribe. It is a singular entity, an object of power that can be held in one city and then moved to another. The rulers do not create the kingship, they receive it. This reinforces their role as functionaries, custodians of an authority that predates them, and, as the post-flood section shows, will outlast them. They are temporary stewards of a permanent, transferable principle of order. The list's internal logic suggests these antediluvian rulers were part of a stable, long-duration order, an order that did not evolve, but simply persisted. The immense reign lengths are not presented as a sign of chaos or mythic time, but of a profound, almost geological stability. The system they governed was, according to the data, unchanging for nearly 250,000 years. It was a steady state, recorded with the monotonous regularity of a scientific instrument monitoring a constant phenomenon. The researcher traces the flow of power on a map, from Eridu in the south, north to Bad Tibira, then to Larak, Sipar, and finally Shurupak. The movement is deliberate, orderly. Each transfer is a clean transaction. This is the recorded political geography of a world under their control. It is not a map of empires rising and falling, but of a single center of authority being methodically relocated over immense spans of time. This forces us to re-evaluate what we are looking at. This is not a history of a people. It is the operational log of an institution. The others are not its subjects but its officers. Their impossibly long lives are not a feature of their biology, but a property of the system they administered. The document is not telling a story about them. It is using their recorded tenures to measure the lifespan of the system itself. And so, their role becomes clear. They are not gods to be worshipped, but predecessors to be accounted for. They are the necessary first entry in a legal document designed to prove an unbroken chain of legitimate authority. Their existence, recorded in these cold, administrative terms, serves as the anchor for the entire concept of Sumerian civilization. They are the source code, the original authorization from which all subsequent power flows. We are left in the quiet presence of this strange, bureaucratic memory. A memory of a world governed not by men or gods, but by designated holders of a function, a system so alien in its scale and stability that its very existence feels like a contradiction. The scribe did not try to explain it. He simply recorded its operational parameters and its eventual total collapse. The dust settles on the display case. The prism remains, a silent testament to this other order. The names and numbers etched into its surface are not an invitation to belief, but a challenge to our understanding of what a historical record can be. They are the preserved data of a system whose operators have vanished, leaving behind only the stark and incomplete paperwork of their long administration. The focus of the inquiry must now shift. It moves away from the marks made in the clay and turns toward the spaces between them. The investigation is no longer of the record, but of the silence the record contains. The most important feature of this document is not what the scribe wrote, but what he was unable or unwilling to write. We are now in the presence of the invisible antagonist, the force of erasure, the quiet, persistent pressure of a memory that has been almost completely lost. It is an exploration of a void, and the first piece of evidence is not an artifact, but an absence in the earth itself. In the deep trenches cut into the tells of ancient Sumerian cities like Ur and Shurupak, the archaeologist's trowel reveals the layers of civilization. Pottery, bricks, tools, bones, each stratum a chapter in a long story. But between these layers of human activity, there is sometimes another kind of layer, a clean, uniform deposit of silt, several feet thick, containing nothing. No pottery shards, no ash from hearths, no sign of life. It is a sterile boundary, a geological pause button. The earth here holds a record of a time when the building stopped, when the writing ceased, when the city fell silent. This layer is not merely mud. It is a preserved moment of profound interruption. It is the physical counterpart to the silence in the king list. To stand at the bottom of an excavation pit and place a hand against this smooth, lifeless band of clay is to touch the memory of the catastrophe itself. It is a tangible silence, a line drawn in the strata of history, separating a before from an after. The world that existed below this line was different, and the evidence for its end is the simple, sterile fact of this empty earth. We return to the final entry before this break. The eighth king, Ubara Tutu of Shurupak. His reign is documented, his city is named, his duration is recorded. And then, nothing. The meticulous administrative protocol that has governed every single transfer of power for a recorded 200 years simply stops. The scribe does not record the king's death. He does not record the fall of the city. He does not record that the kingship was taken to another place. The mechanism of continuity, the very engine of the list, fails. The chain is not handed over. It is shattered. This is not a simple omission. For a scribal culture obsessed with the unbroken line of legitimate succession, this is the ultimate anomaly. It is an administrative black hole. The silence here is not passive. It is an active statement. It suggests an event so far outside the system's established procedures that it could not be processed. The record does not just end. It documents its own failure, its own inability to account for what happened next. The void itself is the final, and most important, entry of the antediluvian age. The scale of this silence expands far beyond the textual. We must now confront the great temporal chasm. The event described, the flood, aligns with the geological upheaval of the Younger Dryas period, nearly 13 Aroan years ago. Yet the first time this event is written down, the first time these kings are recorded, is by Sumerian scribes more than 8,000 years later. An immense, dark corridor of time separates the catastrophe from its first known documentation. An 8-millennium silence. How does a memory, a precise administrative memory with names and numbers, survive such a gap? It would not survive as a clean narrative. It would be fractured, distorted, encoded. It would be preserved not as a story told around a fire, but perhaps as a rigid, sacred formula, repeated by initiates who no longer knew its original context, but understood that its preservation was of the highest importance. The king list, then, is not a history. It is the fossil of a data set that somehow survived an 8,000-year winter of forgetting. Take a moment, where you are, to mark the quality of the quiet, the space between the sounds you can hear. That interval, that lack of signal, is the territory we are now exploring. It is the medium through which this fragile memory had to travel. The antagonist now has a shape. It is this immense pressure of time and cataclysm. It is the force that grinds mountains into sand and memories into myth. Its work is not in the dramatic act of destruction, but in the slow, relentless process of erasure that follows. The sterile layer of silt and the 8,000-year gap are its monuments. The missing fate of the last king is its signature, left in the most secure and sacred document of the civilization that followed. We see this process of erasure even within the text that survives. The scribe gives us the effect, the flood, but he gives us no cause. There is no explanation for why the world was overturned. We are given the result, a new, diminished timescale for humanity, but no reason for the change. The why of the event has been completely scoured away, leaving only the what. The silence here is a lack of context, a memory stripped of its rationale, leaving behind only the cold, hard data of a systemic collapse. The researcher sits in the low light of the archive. Their focus is no longer on the precision of the cuneiform characters, but on the imperfections of the tablet itself. The cracks that run through the clay, the worn edges where parts of the text have flaked away. The physical object is a landscape of presence and absence, a perfect metaphor for the information it contains. The most profound truths of the document lie not in the inscribed signs, but in the fractures and the empty spaces. The true subject of the final antediluvian entry is not Ubara Tutu. It is the king who was meant to come next. The ninth king. The ruler whose name was never recorded because the transfer of power never happened. The entire system of naming and recording succession vanished with him. He is a ghost haunting the ledger, his existence defined entirely by the procedural void that should have contained his name. The list is haunted by the specter of a continuity that was meant to be, but never was. This changes how we must view the evidence. The absence of a record is not a lack of information. It is a specific type of information. It is a negative imprint. The shape of the silence tells us about the nature of the force that created it. An event that merely destroys a city would be recorded. An event that kills a king would be recorded, and his successor named. But an event that destroys the very mechanism of succession itself, that event can only be recorded as a failure of the system. A blank page. And so, the two great silences echo each other across the millennia. The sterile layer of silt in the ground is a geological silence, a pause in the record of life. The procedural rupture in the king list is an administrative silence, a pause in the record of order. One is physical, the other is conceptual, but they both tell the same story. They are parallel accounts of a single, total interruption, one written in earth, the other in the absence of ink. One must consider the scribe's final act for that era. By writing only, "Then the flood swept over," he was not admitting a failure of memory. He was making a deliberate choice. He was acknowledging that the event was of an order that his administrative formulas could not contain. The simple, stark phrase is a testament to the scale of the catastrophe. It was a reality so overwhelming that the only way to record it truthfully was to fall silent. The work of the investigator changes here. We are no longer excavating artifacts from the ground. We are mapping the contours of a void. The tools are no longer the brush and the trowel, but a sensitivity to patterns of omission, to deliberate silences, to the echoes left in the structure of a text. We are tracing the edges of what was lost, using the shape of its shadow as our guide. We are left standing at the edge of this profound emptiness. The investigation has followed the evidence to the very heart of the mystery, and has found that the heart is a hollow space. It is a silence preserved with the same meticulous care as the names and numbers that surround it. This emptiness is not the end of the inquiry. It is the beginning of a different kind of seeing. It prepares us to understand not what was, but the sheer scale of what was taken away. The investigation can no longer remain in the comfortable darkness of the void. The shape of the silence has been mapped, its edges traced. But a preserved absence is not an answer. It is a question of a higher order. If the record of a system's end has been so carefully maintained, it suggests the record itself is not what it claims to be. The Sumerian king list is not a history of what was, but a testament to what was lost, and the very act of its creation becomes the central mystery. It is a monument built around a hollow space, and its purpose can only be understood by examining the weight of that emptiness. The document begins to feel less like a chronicle and more like a memorial. A cold, administrative eulogy not for the 8 kings, but for the principle of stability they represented. The meticulous list of their impossibly long reigns is not a claim of their power, but an attempt to quantify the magnitude of the order that vanished. The scribe is not just recording history. He is preserving the memory of a different kind of time, a different physics of power. The true subject of the document is the system itself, and its catastrophic, unexplained end. The scale of the antediluvian rains must therefore be re-examined. They are not a measure of an individual's life, but of a function's duration. The numbers, 28, 800 years, 43, 200 years, describe a form of authority that operated with the slowness and stability of a geological process. This was not the chaotic, personality-driven rule of human kings. It was a governance so profoundly stable that it could be measured in epochs. The document is recording a quality of order, not a quantity of years, and that quality is alien to our understanding of civilization. The entire apparatus of the list, its formulaic precision, its dispassionate tone, its mathematical rigidity, points to a system that was not human in its origin or its logic. It is the operational log of an institution whose principles were abstract, predictable, and repeatable. The individual rulers, the others, were merely the designated operators of this system, their names entered into the ledger as temporary custodians of a permanent function. The record is not their story. Their story is merely a variable within the record's unyielding formula. This reframes the meaning of the cataclysm. Then the flood swept over ceases to be a purely environmental event. Within the administrative context of the list, it is a statement of total systemic collapse. The water that washed away the cities is secondary to the force that erased the very mechanism of succession. The true catastrophe recorded here is not the loss of life, but the loss of the principle of continuity. The world did not just end. Its operating system crashed. Seen in this light, the post-flood era is not a new beginning. It is an echo, a salvage operation. The new kings, with their slowly diminishing reign lengths, 200 years, 960, 900, are not the founders of a new world, but the inheritors of a broken one. They are attempting to reboot a damaged system, operating on a fraction of its original power. Humanity's recorded history in this document begins not with a bold creation, but with the management of a profound and irreversible decline. The scribe's role is therefore transformed. He is not a historian or a myth-maker. He is a custodian, a preserver of a legacy system. His primary duty is not to interpret the data, but to ensure the integrity of its structure, to copy the ancient file without error. This is why the procedural rupture is so perfectly preserved. He is transmitting a piece of sacred, and perhaps no longer fully understood, information. The form of the record is the message, and that form includes the clean, sharp break where the original system failed. The strangeness of the account becomes an argument for its authenticity, not against it. A civilization inventing a foundational myth would logically create a narrative of empowerment, of local gods granting them an unbroken and supreme authority. The Sumerian king list does the opposite. It anchors its legitimacy in a borrowed predecessor system that failed catastrophically, casting all subsequent human rule as a diminished and secondary state. It is a history that documents its own inferiority, a choice so counterintuitive that it feels less like an invention and more like the honest preservation of a difficult memory. The air in this quiet space is still. The object on the table is no longer a simple artifact. It has become a schematic, a blueprint of a lost architecture of time and power. Its lines and characters are not just words, but the preserved logic of a different reality. One can almost feel the presence of the system it describes, a vast, slow, and silent engine of order that once governed the world. The 800-year silence between the Younger Dryas event and the first Sumerian scribes is no longer an obstacle to the story's credibility. It is the story itself. The king list is not a contemporary account. It is an artifact of recovery. It is a data fragment that survived a dark age of unimaginable length. Its survival, even in this fractured and context-stripped form, suggests the information it contained was deemed so vital that it was preserved as a sacred, unchanging formula, passed down through countless generations who could no longer read the code, but knew they must not alter it. The phrase, kingship descended from heaven is no longer a poetic flourish. It reads now as a technical statement, a description of a technology transfer. The principles of organized society, law, administration, calendrical science, architecture, were not slowly developed from the ground up. They were, according to the document's own logic, an installation, a complete system delivered from an external source. The list, then, is the operational manual for this system, documenting its initial state, its long function, and its terminal error. The others, the Anunnaki, are therefore cast in a new light. They are not gods to be worshipped, but the original technicians, the administrators who understood the system's design. Their disappearance at the moment of the Cataclysm marks not just a change of ruler, but the loss of the knowledge required to maintain the world's foundational order. The silence about the final king's fate is the silence of a civilization losing its chief engineer at the moment of total system failure. If this system's end coincides with a global cataclysm, then the Sumerian record may not be a uniquely Mesopotamian story. It may be the best preserved administrative fragment of a worldwide event. Other cultures remember the flood in myth and legend. The Sumerian scribes, with their bureaucratic obsession, may have preserved a piece of the actual paperwork. The king list could be a single page torn from the final report of a lost global age. The story of this single clay tablet begins to feel like a key to a much larger archive. A file that, once opened, suggests the existence of others, still buried. To continue this watch, to remain present as these connections are followed further, is to ensure one does not lose the trail. This implication destabilizes our own place in time. It suggests that the dawn of our known civilization was not a beginning, but a recovery effort. That our history is not a steady ascent from primitive origins, but a long, slow climb out of the shadow of a far older, more advanced, and catastrophically failed world order. We are not the first chapter. We are the epilogue to a story whose main text has been almost entirely erased. The document, seen this way, may serve one final, chilling purpose. It may be a warning, encoded in the language of bureaucracy. It is a preserved record of systemic fragility. It demonstrates that an order that appeared eternal, that operated with geological slowness for nearly 250,000 years, could be extinguished in a single, unrecorded moment. The silence at the heart of the king list is not a gap in the story. It is the story's final and most important piece of data, that even the most stable systems can break, and that the end, when it comes, may not even be recorded. The light in the room has not changed. It falls on the small block of clay, the Weld-Blundell prism, resting in its climate-controlled stillness. The investigation is over, the connections have been made, the patterns traced. But the object itself remains indifferent to our inquiry. It is not a text anymore, not a piece of evidence. It is a weight, a small, dense concentration of time, holding a silence that is now heavier than any number etched into its surface. It simply is, a fact of baked earth in a quiet room, a final, unmoving witness. One becomes aware of the space around the artifact, the deep, resonant quiet of a museum after the doors have been locked. The air itself seems ancient, filtered and still. The sounds of the outside world are a distant memory, a different order of reality. Here, in the low light, there is only the presence of things that have survived. The silence is not an absence of noise, but a quality of preservation. It is the medium in which the past is held, a gentle pressure that keeps the dust from settling too quickly. In this stillness, it is possible to imagine a hand. Not the hand of a king or a god, but the hand of the scribe. The slight tension in the fingers as they grip a reed stylus. The practiced motion as it presses a wedge-shaped mark into wet clay. A simple, human action, repeated thousands of times to build a record of an inhuman scale. For a moment, the immense gulf of time collapses, and there is only the feeling of that focused administrative act, the creation of a single, precise character. We are left looking at the last of those characters, the final mark made before the formula breaks, the end of the reign of Ubara-Tutu. It is just another impression in the clay, identical in form to all that came before it. Yet it exists at the edge of a precipice. It is the last known data point of a world on the verge of vanishing. The scribe's hand lifted from the clay after making this mark, and when it returned, the world it recorded was irrevocably different. That final small wedge of cuneiform is a monument to an ending. A thin, hairline crack runs across the face of the prism, intersecting the line that separates the old world from the new. It is a flaw of geology, an accident of time, a result of the clay drying 4,000 years ago. But it feels like something more. It is a physical manifestation of the procedural rupture in the text, a scar on the body of the artifact that mirrors the deep, silent wound in the memory it contains. The object itself bears the physical signature of the break it so carefully documents. The dust motes drift in the single beam of light, each a tiny planet in a slow, silent orbit. They settle on the glass case, a fine gray layer that is the constant work of time. This is the antagonist, the force of erasure, in its most patient and elemental form, not a cataclysmic wave, but a slow, quiet burial. The accumulation of moments, of centuries, that grinds mountains into sand and memories into whispers. The scribe's work was an act of defiance against this gentle, inevitable tide. The mind drifts from this curated space out into the open air, to the vast, empty quarter of a desert at dusk. The wind moves across the low mounds that were once the city of Eridu, the place where the kingship first descended. There is nothing here now but sand and the slow erosion of forgotten foundations. The silence here is not preserved. It is vast, alive, and absolute. It is the silence of a place that has finished its story and is slowly being reclaimed by the earth. This wind carries no voices, no echoes of the past. It is simply the sound of the world turning. It scours the surface of the tells, carrying away a few grains of sand with each gust, a process of forgetting measured in geological time. It is the same wind that would have been heard by the last inhabitants of this place, a constant indifferent presence at the edge of their world. It is the sound of what remains when everything else has been taken away. As the last light fades from the horizon, the stars begin to appear. They are cold, distant, and arranged in the same patterns that would have been seen by the scribe of the king list. They are a reminder of a timescale that dwarfs even the 200 years of the antediluvian rains. They are the silent, unchanging witnesses to the world that was, the cataclysm that ended it, and the long, slow recovery that followed. Their light travels through the same void that this story has tried to map. The question that began this journey does not feel answered. It has only expanded. It is no longer a question about a number on a clay tablet, but about the nature of memory itself. What does it mean for a civilization to build its entire identity upon the record of a system it did not create, and whose end it could not explain? The question hangs in the cool night air, over the silent ruins, as vast and unresolved as the star field above. The clay prism is not a history. It is a memorial stone. It marks the place where an order of reality is buried. Its dry, administrative language is the inscription on the tomb, listing the name and age of the deceased. The deceased, in this case, is not a king, but an entire paradigm of existence. The document is a cold, precise eulogy for a world whose stability was its defining feature, and whose end remains a perfect, impenetrable mystery. The inquiry is finished. The files are closed. But the feeling that has been cultivated here, in this quiet space, remains. It is the sense of having stood close to a profound and fragile truth. The awareness that our own history is built upon the foundations of a much deeper, largely erased past. We are not the beginning of the story. We are late arrivals, trying to read a single, damaged page from a book whose other volumes have been lost to the fire. The light in the museum archive is finally extinguished. The room is returned to darkness. The desert outside is now bathed only in the faint, ancient light of the stars. The process of observation is over. The narrator withdraws, leaving the artifacts and the ruins to their long, slow communion with time. There is nothing more to say, nothing more to reveal. The act of watching is complete. The object now rests alone in the dark. The silence it contains has been given a shape, a weight. It is a presence that will remain long after the light is gone, long after we have turned away. It is the final, enduring artifact. A preserved absence. A silence that remembers.